All right, so welcome to our 5th episode of Real Talk with Kimberly Magette. I'm super excited today to have Katie Seagle with Cross Country Mortgage. Katie's the lender she's my preferred lender. Worked with Katie for probably about 6 years now. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep.
Is it been 6 years?
I think it was, if not a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Katie's just a powerhouse of a woman. She's really become one of my best friends, just a badass. And I just love her to death. She holds me accountable. She's one of those women that I've talked about in my previous podcast that holds my feet to the fire, keeps me on track. She's constantly telling me to stay up my budget. Oop, as I fall off my chair. And drinking Panera. Always told me to stay on my budget, and she just kicks ass. So Katie, I want to introduce you, and you just tell us about your story a little bit, and then we'll get into some investing maybe.
Okay. So my story was, I never thought that I would do what I'm doing today or be where I am today. And we'll kind of get into that and like how our theme kind of today is like how taking a calculated risk can benefit you so much. So I grew up a single mom. She worked at, oh my gosh, what's that place with the cheddar biscuits? Everybody, Red Lobster. Okay, she was this, yeah.
Is that about your mom? Okay.
Yeah. So she was a waiter or waitress at Red Lobster.
Yeah.
Had me and my brother. And she realized, hey, I cannot afford 2 kids on a Red Lobster. So she got into the mortgage industry, and she started out in the servicing department, which is where like they call you to help set up your escrow account and make payments. And then she eventually became a loan officer. My early memories from her are she was always on the phone. And I never wanted to do that. So I was like, man, I want a fun job. So this is like right when CSI had came out, and I decided I was going to be a forensic psychologist. And I went to Appalachian State, go Nears. And I decided, okay, that's what I'm going to study. So through my journey at Appalachian State, I realized I was terrible at chemistry and partially terrible at math. So I could never pass the classes. So I went to the second best thing where I felt like I could pass, which was psychology. From there, I'm sure everybody has their transition and where they want to be in their careers.
Yep.
I went and worked at a mental institution, level 4 facility. And what that is as soon as kids get out of the mental institution, they've gone through really hard things, they go to a group home. And I was a counselor there. Through my journey with that, I cannot stay up late. They put me on third shift for some reason. And they told me a story. They're like, hey, don't fall asleep, because if you ever fall asleep and your mouth's open, they'll put a light bulb in there and click your jaw. And they're like, it'll shatter in your mouth. And I was like, oh my gosh. Well, I fell asleep, of course, like my second night there. And I woke up and the girl was like standing over me, and I was like, okay, I did not meant to do this either. No. So then I was like, I just have to find a job. And I just wanted to make $15 an hour at this point, just to meet what my rent was, which was $300 a month. So I started working for a garage door company as a receptionist, and I was still trying to find my way. And inside the drawer, after about a month or 2 of being the receptionist, there was a sheet of paper, and it said, if you sold a garage door opener, like a little remote, you got $1. If you sold the actual motor, you got $25. If you sold a garage door, you got $250. So this was my first lesson in commission sales.
Yeah.
So instead of making appointments for the outside salespeople, I would bring all the clients in, and I would sell them a garage door, an opener, and everything. So I ended up making a commission check of $2,000, like my 3rd month there. And so then they're like, okay, we cannot pay you this salary and this. And the outdoor salespeople were so mad. And I was like, and so they put me in outside sales.
Yeah.
So I was making around 40 grand.
Okay.
So from there, at the same time, my husband found out that his dad had Alzheimer's. So this is a couple years later. So we knew we had to move back home. And of course, what do you do when you move back home? You call your parents. Yep. And I was like, all right, I've got to find a job. And my mom, still a mortgage lender, which I said I would never do, was like, hey, I'm working for this crazy guy. I want you to go and I want you to just hear him talk, because if you're going to be in sales, you should be in mortgages. Again, I can't do math. I wasn't really interested, but I went and heard this guy talk. And the guy said, like, he did this amazing talk, and I can't tell you all the points that he made because it was 15 years ago. No, probably 10 years ago. But he just talked about money, which nobody ever talks about. And he talked about being a millionaire. And I was like, I'm just trying to make 50 grand at this point. So, yeah. And you got to think, like, 10 to 15 years ago, 50 grand a year was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted. That's what I budgeted for. I did not have any dreams to ever really pursue that. My ultimate goal by the time I turned 60 would be to make $100,000.
Yep.
And I think a lot of that's we're programmed, like with what our parents made and what what we're surrounded ourselves with. But this guy kind of opened up my eyes.
Yeah.
So I went up to him afterwards and I was like, hey, I'm Sandy Dickinson's daughter, which is my mom's name. And I was like, I heard, you're amazing. I'm just trying to make $50,000 by the time I turn 30. And he looked at me and he's like, what if you make $100,000 in 3 years? And I was like, what? Sold. I'll follow you.
Right? Yeah, I think Rick has that, he has that effect on you, right? And when he talks money, and we'll have him on this podcast at some point, when he talks money, he's just the way he just breaks it down for you, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he not only breaks it down, but he talks about how, like, hey, you put yourself in a bubble.
Yeah.
And you've set these, and I had set these goals at age 25, maybe 28, to where I'd already maxed myself out on where I wanted to be at 55 and 60.
Yep.
So I followed him. Like, if anybody watches The Chosen, I always make the joke where Jesus says, follow me. And the guy's like, I will. That was me. I was like, I will. So we moved down. He taught me the mortgage industry. The first year under his guidance and mentorship, I made $75,000.
Yep.
Second year, I made $150,000. So he surpassed it. And then from there on out, I just kept growing until he made me a millionaire at age 33.
Yeah.
So it was a risk.
It's a huge risk. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a risk. But you know what you're doing, right?
I know what I'm doing. And I'm not saying the mortgage industry made me. Yes, I've made a lot of money there. But it was the investments that I learned along the way. And while I did the mortgage industry, and Rick also taught me about the stock market, compound interest, investing, diversifying your investment, things that I never learned about in school.
Yep.
And I had no desire to learn. I wanted to be a forensic psychologist. I wanted to be on CSI. And I never thought mortgages was sexy and nobody knows about it. Or investing.
I'm with EXP now, but I was originally with Keller Williams, and I've always tried to learn as much as I can from where I'm at or who I'm from. And one of the things I remember being at Keller Williams is we did this, I don't know what you want to call it, like set or whatever, where they're trying to teach you mindset, right? Change your mindset. Right. And it literally was, you had to go through this, if you had $100,000, how would you spend it? And you literally had to spend all of it. And then you would double that. Then you had 200,000 and you had to spend all that 200,000 and not doubling what you had with that, that 100,000 before. So 200,000, then 400,000, then 800,000. You had to do that all the way up to $1 million. And it's literally almost impossible when you start looking at having to spend all that money. And it changes your mindset about money, right? And the mindset was that money is really the most easily replaced asset that we have, because you can't buy a house without money, or you can't. And two, it was like, why not me? Because it's like you kind of get this mindset of like, I'm not worthy of it, or I'm not deserving of it. But you are, and it's just like what Rick says, like you can't be a blessing to others if you don't have it. And so I think a lot of people have that mindset that, I'm not capable of, having this money. So that being said, like, I know my goal and your goal, and a lot of what Rick tells us is for us to help people grow their wealth. Right. And right. A lot of kind of what you had talked about, and the point of what we've called this podcast is fear. And so many people, I think, live in fear because they're scared to to necessarily invest and to give up kind of what they have. How have you grown? Because your wealth is incredible. It's not only just your income, but I mean, you own multiple houses, and like what would you say like kind of drove you to be able to move forward? Because you didn't grow up wealthy. I mean, you don't come from, like
no, cheddar biscuits. We came from cheddar biscuits.
Yeah.
You know what it is, and I take this opportunity with everybody, is I always ask people, and we always talk about going to a bigger room. So when I started out in mortgages and I would do people's loans, if I ever saw someone that made more than me at any point, I would always say, okay, how did you get there? What did you do? And the most people that I see that make the most money are either in sales, or they developed something, or through real estate.
Yeah.
So one of my clients in particular, this was before I had bought my first home. When I moved here, my mom was a mortgage lender. She probably needed a deal. I was making like I went from the $40,000 I was making with the garage door company to $12 an hour. And then I was engaged at the time. So me and my husband bought a $180,000 home, and we did FHA loan. We put 3.5% down, and it was cheaper than renting, honestly.
It's still
yeah.
The number is much bigger. But
So keep in mind, at this point, I was still learning the business. I trained for a couple of months before I did it. And I remember I sold my house to like 2.5 years later, and I made $80,000. So that was my first like introduction to wealth and real estate.
Yeah.
And I was like nowhere making the $12 an hour, or even the $75,000 the first year, the $150 the second year. Was I going to be able to ever save $80,000?
No, you won't ever.
No. So I was like, well, what can I do with this money? So of course I took half of it and I put it into my new home. And then the other half, I started to learn about the stock market and compound interest. And that's something that it was introduced to me also by the mentor that like kind of drove me into this. It was like, hey, you need to utilize the stock market. So I did that, and the stock market is great. And we'll kind of talk about like different things about how to invest. If you've never invested something that you can invest in, that you feel safe with, and how to start, and kind of how I started. But as I was doing that, this girl I was doing a mortgage for, she was buying $1 million home on the lake. And I had looked at her portfolio. She had owned multiple houses. They were paid like no mortgages on it, but she didn't have a lot in cash assets. And so I looked at her and I was like, and I said, this is my job. And I was like, but what makes you feel okay about buying this? And she wasn't putting very much money down. And I was like, and you have all these other properties, and I know that they're paid off, but you still owe taxes and insurance. And I was like, where do you have the guts to do this in a market she was in sales as well, so it wasn't a steady income. And she's like, I'm a risk taker. And the biggest thing she said to me is, I'm not just a risk taker, I'm a calculated risk taker.
Love that.
Yeah. And I was like, and I love just the terminology, because it makes you stop and think. Like, it's a calculated risk. It's not like you just close your eyes and you're like, I'm just going to go buy every property out there.
Throw in
savings. Yeah. And I was like, so tell me how this is your calculated risk, because I'm intrigued by it now, because now I want someone to define me as a calculated risk taker, because I just think it's cute. Yeah. And she said, so here's the deal. I'm buying this house on the lake. And she was like, and if I ever don't make a sell, or I can't afford it, she was like, if I look at the market, I can rent it out for 2 years. That will pay my mortgage, and I can sell it and make a 10% on investment. Like, she's like, I'll make 10% off the top. So she's like, that's the calculated risk. If I cannot pay the mortgage, she's like, I'll go rent somewhere, but I'll have someone else move in that can.
Yeah.
And I and it just changed my mindset. Like, hey, buy a property that you can rent out. Look at that worst case if you can't afford it. And from there on, I look at every time I buy a property, what's my calculated risk? Yeah. Like, if I move into it, right? Or if a renter moves out, how quickly could I replace them? Yep. It just made me more daring in the market that I never would have been before.
And so it's mindset again, right? It's all you look at it. And we talked about this the other day. It's that saying of you can live in fear, or you can walk kind of through faith, right? Or live in regret, or walk through fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
right. My calculated risk was I left a $45,000 job, moved here to make $12 an hour, but could I probably find something for $40,000 if this didn't work out? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just think a lot of it is faith driven, but also that calculated risk. What's the worst case scenario and where could you really lose, but what could you gain?
Oh, 100%
ahead of that.
Yeah. Like you said, it's calculated. So you're not just going, oh, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Well, get back for one. It's, worst case, I break even.
Mm-hmm. Right. I don't have to make $1 million off of it. But best case, when I looked at her portfolio, she's young. The girl that this is, she could probably retire in 5 or 10 years and she'd be under 50 and she'd be totally fine. Yeah. So then that's where it's like the mentorship, right? Like, okay, I saw you do it. I know that it's possible. Right. She'd been doing it for a while, even through some crashes, right? Yep. So, and still made it. So, and she didn't go above her means either, in a way. Like, she had those houses paid off before she went and bought her next $1 million property. Yeah. So it was calculated. So ever since then, now I'm addicted to real estate and I give mortgages. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So what has guided you with kind of getting over that fear of getting into the stock market? Because I think a lot of people right now are sitting on a ton of equity. They don't want to give up their interest rates, that 2-3% interest rate, right? And so I saw something on Instagram the other day where a gentleman was talking about the first 100,000 is the hardest to get. Once you get that 100,000, the compounding interest, you could very quickly get to 500,000 and then that $1 million. But it's comforting to know that you have that kind of equity, right, in your house versus putting it in the stock market. Because I talk to people about that and they're like, well, I know nothing about the stock market. Stock market's unstable, or there's just a fear of, there's something comforting about having that equity in your house versus taking it out and putting it in the stock market. So what would you say to people that have that kind of fear?
So equity really gives you 0% on return, right? Now appreciation, right, when your house appreciates is where you kind of see your return on investment. But as far as equity, it's not really doing anything. It's not working for you. So again, I was mentored on taking risk, and I started in this business. I first started with, you have to have a vision, right? And my first vision was, I just want to be able to sleep at night. I just want to have enough in savings that if if the world for 3 months shuts down, like it kind of did in COVID, right? Would I be able to pay my bills? And when I first started, I was out of a couple of, these jobs that failed. I was making $12 an hour, and my husband at the time wasn't making much, more. So my first vision was, I just want to save up enough to sleep. So at that point, it's 3 months of your survival number is what I was taught. It's like kind of because if anything crashes for 3 months, you have 3 months of savings. So I went through, hey, where can we cut costs? At that point, we ate ham sandwiches for lunch every day. Yeah. We would spice it up. And like 1 week we would get hot peppers to add to it. The next week we would buy mustard to add to it. So, this grunt work is not fun. You can get creative with it, but it is like becoming a minimalist so that you can achieve the next vision. Yeah. So I saved up my 3 months. We ate sandwiches for a year, whatever. I got my 3 months of savings. And then I was like, okay, what do I do next? Yeah. Then I learned about 401k, and I would max out my 401k. So then I was like, all right, I got to take
that's free money right there, right? If you're not maxing out your 401k, your employer's going to match it. That's just free money that you're losing.
Yeah. If your employer matches it, I say that is like the best form of investment, almost sometimes better than the stock market. If they don't, then I'm kind of leaning towards, you're going to make money faster in the stock market because your 401k is probably a little bit less riskier. So then my next vision was 3 months of savings. And then after you think about that, I started thinking about retirement. And I was like, how long do I want to work for? How long do I want to work this hard for? And what kind of life do I want to make myself? And at this time, I would travel around with other mortgage loan officers, and they would be on stage and they would tell me how much money they had in the bank, which is something that not a lot of people talk about. People are always surprised when I start talking about it. We've made new friends and they're like, man, your wife is always talking about like the stock market. And it's not obnoxious. I'm not talking about it constantly, but if it's something that I can say, hey, have you ever thought about investing in the S&P 500? Just because nobody talks about it, so nobody gets educated on it.
Right.
And because if I can do it, I feel like anybody else can do it. So I just feel like it's a conversation that you can have with people where it gets them excited as well. So stock market, and I forgot the date, but ever since it's like been 80 years, the average return on investment is like, it's averaged over 80 years, 10% return on investment is the S&P 500.
Yeah.
So your safest stock to invest in is going to be that one. And that's where I started.
Okay. It's good advice.
Yep. So I would take I would start off with $200 a month and I would put it in the stock market. And then I was like, all right, how much do I want to live off of when I become 55? Because ultimately that's my goal currently is I want to retire at 55.
Yeah.
And then I would calculate what I needed to get to that point by the time I was 55.
Okay.
And what I'll do is I'll try to share my screen here. Oh, I can't. I don't know. Can you able it for me to share the screen?
Let me see. Did that work?
Let me see. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right. So what I learned off on was moneychimp.com. So if anybody ever wants, do you see it?
Yes. Yep.
It's a compound interest calculator. Okay. So I started playing around on this because I was like, okay, how much do I need to save a month to make it work? And you and I talked about this. The first 100,000 is the hardest. And you even saw it on a podcast. Yeah. So let's say, and I would just start even like I started off honestly with $5,000 in my account. Okay. And I knew I could, well,
we're losing you a little.
I would. Oh, can you hear me now?
Now I can, yeah.
Okay. So chimpmoney.com and you can Google any compound interest calculator.
Okay.
I only had $5,000 in savings at the time. I knew I could put in $1,200 a year. And at that point, I would probably play with 20 to 25 years and how long I had to work. You know, this was years ago. And the annual interest rate of return, we'll say conservatively, could be 5. When you calculate that, I knew in 25 years, I could have 77,000. Okay. So every year that this would start to grow, your interest starts to grow. Can you still hear me?
Yep, you're good.
So then once I got 15,000 in savings, and then I could start putting 2,500, I would recalculate. And then I noticed the more that I had, the faster my interest grew.
Yep.
So they always say, so once you can get to 100,000, and let's say we talked about you're sitting on equity that's not making you any money right now, because equity doesn't make you money, but appreciation does, right? You're sitting on $100,000 in equity. Like you can still put, let's say $3,000 a year. Still, you know, if you got to work, I'm only going to do it 15 more years, hopefully, at a 5% rate, which is conservative because the S&P normally performs better than that. Your future value just keeps getting better and better.
Yep.
And then the more aggressive you can get, I've learned that if I saved $5,000 a month at one point, which I know is a lot, right? But I kept growing in my business and I was taking more risk.
Yep.
And in real estate. And still, I didn't keep my annual addition much. Look how much, and like that, the more money you have, the faster it grows. And so ultimately, I changed my mindset that instead of spending, I became obsessed with saving.
Saving. Yep. And that's the only way to build your wealth, right? And like you said, instead of all that equity sitting in a house and now that money's working for you. And let's talk about, you mentioned return on investment a couple of times too. your return on investment isn't necessarily, if you bought a house for say 500,000 and now you're selling it for 700,000, your return on investment is, I mean, you take over. Like, what if I put $10,000 down or $20,000? That's my return on investment, right?
Correct. So I don't encourage, like, if you could put 20% down, I think that's amazing. But sometimes I tell people, you get a higher return on investment if you only put 5% down when you buy a home, right? And then you take that other money and you put it in this compound interest. So your money is growing in your real estate, which is what I've done, which is probably the fastest growing, right? It's been my real estate, but I also want to take calculated risks. So I don't want to get over my head in the amount of properties that I own. But then I also have it working for me in the S&P 500. And then I started getting a little bit more tactical and learning about essential stocks. And then now I'm even dripping into some AI stocks. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah. But ultimately, I think the lesson here is that you took somebody that only wanted to make 50 grand a year, right? And yes, my occupation has helped me grow from that. But most of my money really was made through the stock market and through buying and selling real estate, which was calculated risk. And I just had to change what I was programmed all throughout college to do, like, get a safe job, stay there for 20 years. You only have to make 50,000, save a little bit each month. And then, you can just live off Social Security. By then, hopefully your house is paid for. I just wanted more than that. And I'm glad I asked the right people, the right questions.
Yeah.
And then, which has grown me to where I can also givers gain, give back as well.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and what I will say about you is you are a phenomenal woman. You make fantastic money, but you're also one of the most humble ladies that I know. Sometimes I have to encourage you to tell people how much you make, because you're like, oh, I just don't want to brag. And I'm like, no, it encourages me, and it encourages other people to not live in that fear and to build their own wealth. And I know that that's always your heart, and you do have one of the biggest hearts. So I love that. And you do great things. So,
well, thank you. And I think it's amazing that people can do it 10 times faster than I've done it. So that's even better. And I love watching that. So ask the right question. Make the calculated risk.
Yeah.
And then, and then just duplicate what other people have already done the work for.
That's key, right? And that's why, like, we've talked about this, being able to be in rooms with people that are bigger than us and better than us and that make more money. I think that's key right there, is being able to learn from other people and watch how they've grown their wealth and build their wealth too, right?
Absolutely. And I think you are an amazing, like, me and my husband talk about it all the time, your story, right? You were a single mom, you have 2 kids. And then to take a risk, a calculated risk, to become a realtor and to come straight commission, right? And then to make your own way, your own wealth. And you were telling me, and I think you should mention it, the story of when you became a realtor. What someone said.
Yeah, my story is similar to yours. When I was working, my salary was very good, and but I did want to kind of go out on my own. And I told the gentleman I was working for, I said, hey, look, I'm going to go to real estate school. In the evenings won't affect my job. And he was military, so he was very, well, and he shook his head. He said, no. I think that's a bad choice for you. And I said, what? And he was like, yeah. He's like, you're too old and you don't know anybody. And mind you, that was 10 years ago, right? I was like, what? And he said, no, you'll never make any money. You won't be successful at that. And all of that lit a fire under my butt. Like, listen, that was probably the best thing he could have said to me, because I was like, well, I appreciate that. But, and I did. I went to school at night, and my goal then became to just prove him wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But grateful for the chip. And then again, I just think that just shows people that we all have been programmed to put ourselves in these boxes.
100%.
Right. Where I still know people, like, every time I help a first time home buyer and they move up, and I'm like, man, you just made $200,000 in like 3 or 4 years. I'm like, that's amazing. And what you could do with that's your retirement plan right there.
Well, we just helped our clients, Joe and Annie, first time home buyers, and they were definitely starting later in life, but never thought that they had it in their minds that they would never be able to purchase a home. And the day they closed, they were so happy, and they're finally building wealth for themselves instead of making those renters rich, you know?
Right.
So it's just, yeah, it's, again, we've been putting these boxes. I remember somebody told me, if your salary could match your age, then you're successful. And I bought into that for a first couple of years. And then I was like, no, like, that's not cutting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, that's my thing. I only wanted to make 50 grand. And then the guy once sent me a card, and I still have it. It's a thank you card. It's in my desk drawer, and it says, before I die, you will make $1 million. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, when I finally made it, we had to get up and say the story. And when I got up, he was there, and I was like, do you remember when you first wrote me this card? And I was like, you can go now. But I don't know. It's just someone to believe in you, someone to give you some motivation, someone that you can see that didn't grow in wealth or never thought it was a possibility. That's why I will share my story humbly. Yeah. But don't sue me. I'm not that rich.
Well, yeah, right. Well, I think it's worth mentioning that man didn't even graduate high school. And, he's changing lives. So
yeah, I agree. So, but yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being on here. I appreciate you so much in my life, and you've changed many of my clients' lives, and love working with you. And yeah.
Same sister. All right. Thank you.
All right. Love you, Katie.
All right. You too. Bye.